Hi, everybody. Welcome to La Lista, a Latinx writers podcast. I am your host, Ruben Mendive, and today we have a new writer here virtually. I'm so happy to have him on. So my first question is always, what's your name and how do you identify?
Hello, universe, interwebs. My name is Henry Alexander Kelly, and I identify as an Afro-Latinx Nicaraguan gay bear.
My first question is always, where are you from? And so what is that, and whatever that means to you?
Oh, you got some time? I come from a tiny little town called San Pablo, California. I was born in San Francisco, and then my little chubby self was taken over to San Pablo in a Nicaraguan household. Is where I grew up in San Pablo. I would go to Nicaragua every summer up until I was like 18 or 19. No, 17 is when I stopped because my parents were like, I got older, high school was happening, so jumping back and forth between countries is a little bit, just harder because I wanted some place to okay, this is where my home is. But there's that saying, ni de aquí ni de allá, but I feel like I'm both de aquí y de allá. Because really, the Nicaraguan culture is ingrained in my bones. You will never go hungry at my house, ever. Like we make the most delicious foods. So then at 19, I left San Pablo and then moved out here to SoCal and started working at Disneyland as a tour guide. And then after 5 years of that, I left and just did full-time artistry, acting, writing, and now here I am in my beautiful place here in Hollywood, where the stars live.
And I always like to get a background on people's parents, grandparents, or sort of what's their story.
Yeah, so my grandmother, my mom on my mom's side, she was a candy maker in Nicaragua, a very hardworking woman. Her and her 14 kids, so many babies, ran this candy shop, and that's where I feel like my mom learned to be a hard worker through her mom, and then I learned to be like a very hardworking, passionate individual through my mom. And then my dad's parents were much, they went to school, they kind of got blue collar jobs, and were just hardworking and consistently just doing chill things, working and then relaxing at home, but very focused. And my dad is like that too. He went to school, got a master's in electrical and mechanical engineering in Nicaragua, and then started working and doing that there, and then moved that skill set to when he moved here to California. And so I definitely feel like my mom's whimsy and passion I get from her side of the family, and my dad's focus and grit. Would grit be a good word for that? Grit and determination and relaxingness, because some things are way out of my control, I get from my dad. They're a very cute couple, even now. Obviously, like any parents, they fight, and you're like, I'm just gonna awkwardly sit here, you guys finish this conversation. But I thank them for teaching me to go for what I want, and that's something that I love and admire about my parents.
And what specifically brought your parents to NorCal?
In the I think it was the 80s, or late 70s, early 80s, there was a civil war happening in Nicaragua, and so my parents were actually working for the Nicaraguan government at the time, and they wanted to leave because they didn't know how the situation was. So my dad first left and met up with my tia Lili, who lived out in the city of San Francisco. And so my mother waited out there with my brother and two sisters for 2 years or so, and then once everything was in order, they came through, and they just wanted to leave and be safe somewhere. The goal was to get a lot of my family out and bring them over here to the States, but you know how those things goes. It's it may happen, it may not happen, but luckily they were all safe out in Nicaragua. Everybody in my family they're still out there, and we go out and visit when we can. I mean, now there's uprisings happening. It's funny. So there was an uprising happening in the 80s for the bad government. Then that government went into power, and now there's another uprising now against that government. it's a cyclical thing, and Nicaragua's never really been free to be truly its own beautiful, like, country. It's always in the midst of a battle, and I'm like, oh, I can't wait for the day where that doesn't happen. And then right now I feel like that's going to change, especially with how the world is right now. I definitely think that's gonna change drastically.
You mentioned you grew up in San Pablo, so like, how would you describe it to someone that's never been there?
A little melting bowl pot. So, for example, you all know Berkeley, right? UC Berkeley. There's Richmond nearby, Oakland, Emeryville, where Emeryville's where Pixar's at, and San Francisco. So we're like 20 to 30 minutes away, and it's like a chill little town. It's like, I like to call it like a beautiful, weird cement, like gritty place. It's like, oh, something dangerous might happen around the street, but there's also a delicious Salvadorian restaurant a block away from that. So I never not felt safe, but you were always like, oh, I don't know, maybe something will happen. But it was cute. It was a cute place to grow up. I liked it. There was always something to do because you were so close to the city and everything. San Pablo itself doesn't have much to do in the city, but everywhere else, it's like, if you live there, you're pretty close to a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and I'm curious about like how you describe your childhood and like your household growing up.
My childhood was spent playing a lot of video games. I'm going to say I was very insulated as a kid. Like, I don't know if it was just my parents, but I think in general, there are some parents that are very overprotective of their kids, especially with my parents coming to a new country and not really knowing things. And I was the first one born here, so now they were dealing with a kid who was growing up with the mentality of an American, like, constantly. And so I was very rebellious growing up. I hated that I couldn't sleep over friends' houses. I hated that I couldn't do these certain things, but it was just my parents, trying to protect me, because, they had left a war, and so that was still in their mind, their mentality. So growing up, I was always surrounded by family. I was always surrounded by huge family gatherings or family friends. By the time I was in high school, I was given more freedom to go out and do my thing, but I don't know, most of the time I was kind of a lone kid, to be honest, with just family and myself and my thoughts. That's why I jumped into video games a lot, because I felt this sense of adventure and freedom that I wasn't getting anywhere else.
Yeah, and I am always curious. I like to single out like middle school, high school age. Who were you? Who were you pretending to be? And how did other people see you during that time?
So who was I? It's so crazy. I was thinking about this like a few weeks ago, because I'm like a crazy, zany, off-the-wall person, and that was not me growing up. Me growing up was very like, wow, I would wear like hoodies and long jackets and shirts to like hide my body and myself, because I was very, not ashamed. I would say I was very like worried. If I was quiet, right, then I would just be the quiet kid and nobody would mess with me, and therefore I also wouldn't mess or engage with anybody. Because I don't think I didn't know how to engage with humans, right? Because I was so protected from the world. So I think in middle school and in high school, I was very much, no, middle school, I was a reserved person. And even the few friends I had, like, I always felt, I was like, are they really my friend? I don't know. Like, oh, I don't know. Growing up, you learn what your parents are teaching you. And so my parents were, in their efforts to protect me, I wasn't getting the human engagement that I probably should have been getting,
So what'd you do after high school? Like, what was the plan after high school, and did things go according to plan?
Let's talk about high school first. High school was, I think that's when I was more coming out of my shell, and I think it was after freshman year when I was like, oh, high school's a different game. Like, I can be whatever the F I want right now, so I'm going to join these drama nerds, and we're going to do some stuff. Can I curse on this thing?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, great. We're going to do some shit and fuck up this school and, like, be crazy and ridiculous. And I would hop around, like, from different social groups and figure things out. Growing up, so this was the original plan. Are you ready for this? This would be a different trajectory for Henry. I wanted to be an archaeologist and a history major. Can you imagine this face like teaching people history. No, 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 no. When I found out that being an archaeologist wasn't like Indiana Jones, and I wouldn't wear a cool hat, and I had to brush the skulls of like humans with a toothbrush, I was like, no, bitch, this is not my bag. This is not my bag. Something else. And so, because I was so involved in the arts and drama, and my brother is also an actor, I was like, oh, I think that's what I want to do. And so I graduated high school, didn't go to any university. I got into a few universities, but I was like, God, this is so expensive and ridiculous. Also, I went to a high school that cost $10,000 a year. It was a private Catholic high school, which, I mean, it's so expensive, like just ridiculously expensive. So at that point, I was like, well, I don't want my parents to use more money. Like, let me go to a junior college and figure this out. So I left. I left high school, graduated, and then went to a JC for 2 years. And I realized I was like, I don't think the education system for my brain is my route. And I kind of was already knowing that as I was like senior year. I was like, no, I don't like learning this stuff. I want to learn stuff beyond the scope of what the structure of education is. And so after 2 years of being at a JC, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to leave home. I have visited my friend in Irvine multiple times as he was studying at UC Irvine. I was like, I love SoCal. Like, I want to be an actor ultimately, so why not move to SoCal? And so I left to go audition for the Aladdin musical. I almost got into the show, barely. Did not, but then I was like, I don't want to go back home. I'm going to stay here and apply at Disney. And I started working at Disneyland as an attractions cast member, getting people on Star Tours, the ride, and the old Captain EO Michael Jackson ride, which is it was a very, very fun job. And so while I was doing that, I was kind of finding myself and discovering myself, and I got into a relationship that lasted 4.5 years. And it was such a blast, like 5 years of working at Disney. After a year of working in attractions, I became a VIP tour guide, which was touring celebrities, politicians, and everything that I think I would have learned in school, I ended up learning just by living and being at Disney and experiencing all these vast points of views. And once I felt like I was ready to leave, and like I had like, oh, I think I'm grown enough to leave Disney and go finally pursue my dreams, it's been an amazing ride. Like there was no like initial plan for me, but I felt like that's just how I am as a person, and allowing myself to lose control has allowed for more routes and pathways to open up for me.
Yeah, and I'm always curious about people that move to LA. I've like just started saying it now. I heard it somewhere, but it was like, if you can make it the first like 2 or 3 years, those would be the hardest. And if you can sort of get over that hump, you're sort of here to stay. So can you just talk about those first couple of years?
Oh my gosh, the first couple of years. Whew, Lord Jesus. The first year I was here, I was only working part-time at Disneyland. So I had told my parents, I was like, yeah, no se preocupen, mami, papa. Like, I'll make enough money. Like, it'll be fine. That was a lie. That was a bold-faced lie. So I was living with my brother at the time. And, I could only live with him for so long because he was older. I was in a relationship. And then I had to leave and find a new place to live. So I moved in with this girl who, God, I don't remember her name. She was a bitch, though. That's all I do remember. And then, I met this guy on a dating app, as people do. And I was 20 at the time, which is just crazy to think. Like at 19 or 20, I just left and was like, I think it was all the years of insulation. I was like, I'm going to go and be free now, mom and dad. And so I met this guy. And we started talking and dating, and then he invited me to live with him at his home. And so I lived with him for like 4 or 5 years, and it was great. It was my first time in a relationship in a house now, like living with someone that I cared for. The first, as I mentioned, the first year and a half was a little rough. But then when we met and started living together, it was great. And I was still in Orange County, so I wasn't officially in Hollywood just yet. And at that time, like I said, I was just discovering myself, going on countless trips. Oh my God, I went to so many places across the U.S. with this guy. It was I have too many stories to tell because of that time. Yeah, I definitely think once I got to Hollywood, though, like the first year, I think that's where the saying of like when you really get to LA, like the first year and a half is hard. And that year was hard because I had just gotten out of a relationship. I had just left Disney. I was working multiple jobs. I was just figuring out like what I was doing. And then after a year, I kind of got my groove, and I was like, okay, I can do these day jobs. I can focus on this. I'm going to write on the side. I'm going to audition and move and move and move.
And I'm always curious about that for people that move to LA to do the thing you want to do, and then sort of real life gets in the way. So like, what was like that turning point for you that was like, you're in a relationship, you have like the stable job, you're doing well at it, but again, not the thing you're here to do. So like, what was that shift?
What's really funny is I'm going to give it to two friends of the podcast. Shout out to Alex Alfaro and Rosa Navarrete. So Alex Alfaro, I think this was 4 years ago, goes, hey, they're having auditions for this show at Casa 0101. You should go check it out. And I definitely think that was the beginning of me getting introduced to the art, like an actual artistic scene in LA and be surrounded by an artistic community. And that's where Rosa and I met. And she and I became really awesome friends. And that was my jumping off point, was just diving into this world of like, oh, there's so many Latinx artists here. There's so many people, there's so many artists in general. And so I would slowly get into these rooms where I was like, wow, like I'm here in these rooms, like really great artists, and I'm learning so much more and like really feeling like I finally am a part of something bigger than myself and what I wanted to do this whole time, which was tell stories, connect with people, and get people to just see things in a different perspective, And I will say that I think Alex Alfaro and my brother Luis to some extent, because he was pushing for me to go audition, I think they were the catalyst for me to like jump into an artistic pond and like see where it would take me.
Yeah, because I think for this like artistic life, there's no like roadmap.
No,
so
gosh.
So that's why when you're like in a job where you could see your promotion, you see your next raise, you see like vacation days and all that stuff.
Oh my God, and I was doing great. I was like, how much are you tipping me for these tours? I'm gonna flip my hair even though I don't have any. And it was like I could have probably taken over Disneyland. I swear. And Walt Disney would have been like, a brown man taking over Disneyland? How does that happen? But I'm happy that was not the case, and I'm happy that the trajectory went somewhere else,
And sort of what were your parents thinking, you moving to LA, you pursuing this sort of life, like what's their like sort of thoughts on it?
Oh, my parents were terrified. My parents were absolutely terrified. I mean, I'm the youngest of four. The other three siblings, I mean, my brother didn't leave home until he was like 28, 29 or something like that. My other two siblings, my sisters, lived not at home, but like very close to home, and they didn't leave until they were in their late 20s too. And I left at 19 years old. I was like, bye, deuces, gotta go. And so that's a huge, I'm going to say culture shock, because I think they never expected that to happen. And I definitely think American culture sets people up to be like, you're independent, you need to try to do something on your own. And here's the thing, though. You think you're independent, and you're like, oh, I'm going to do everything I want. I have dreams. And you're like, I have to pay for things for my dreams. I have to, like, only eat ramen for 3 weeks, and like I need to get this like thing that I need to live, so I'm gonna do this ramen thing. And they were just worried about me, and to an extent I was worried about myself too. But I think the idea of not looking like a failure, first of all, and then secondly, like really wanting the sense of freedom was what kept pushing me. And after my parents saw that, they were like, oh, he's doing pretty well and doing it, they got less worried and more like relaxed. Even though parents worry all the time, and even to this day, they're probably worried about things. They're like, you're going on a podcast? Don't talk about us. I'm like, that's all I'm going to do is talk about y'all. I love you.
And, you mentioned that you sort of got introduced to Casa and sort of started expanding your like creative circle. So can you sort of talk us through that timeline of just like what came next, and like, because it sounded like you sort of started to get the ball rolling.
Yeah. So Casa, I did this show called Drunk Girl, and it was a deep show about like rape culture and, you know, toxic masculinity, which I was like, what are these terms? I don't know. I'm a little young boy man. And so I began to just dive into this artistic world with that show. And then after that, I started really, really really writing, really trying to focus on my career. Like, I had no resumes at the time. I don't know what an acting reel was. I was like, what is this? I had no idea like what the business of it is. So for like 2 or 3 years or so, I was just doing different shows, different readings. After Casa, I went over to a company called Ensemble Studio Theater LA, which is an incredible, incredible theater company in Atwater Village. And I got to meet them and start telling, once a month they do this thing called True Story LA, where you write an 8-minute story and just tell your story, whatever, based on the theme of that month. And so I joined them, and I auditioned for just a bunch of shows and got involved with Downtown Repertory Theater. I think it was in 2017, I auditioned for this thing with the American Heart Association, where I got to teach people about hands-only CPR through rap and hip-hop and dance. And that paid insanely well. Like, I was like, how much money am I making? And I'm traveling the country? Is this like what a goddess feels like? I was like, am I Beyonce? Those 2 years were so fun and free and crazy, and I got to learn so much more about myself and so much more about the country. America is a crazy place. Like, LA compared to, like, where were we? Augusta, Maine, like out like way near Canada, is so different. Like, just it's like we're living in 2 separate worlds. Like the cities near the coast are way different worlds than like places that are far removed from it.
Yeah, and I'm curious of like where like the writing came in for you. Like trace that back to like where you feel like you started like writing, and then sort of where it developed from there.
Writing for me came to me when I was in high school. After playing video games for forever in middle school and then into high school, I was realizing that I loved the sense of adventure that these games created for me. I was like, wow, I love these grand scope adventures, and they're so heartfelt and connected, from The Legend of Zelda to Kingdom Hearts to like even like a game like Ratchet and Clank. The worlds that were created were so real to me. I mean, I still love Sonic the Hedgehog to this day. Like my ultimate dream would be to voice a character in a Sonic the Hedgehog film. Paramount, if you're hearing this. And gaming was an escape, and so I started. I took a creative writing class in high school with, I forgot the lady's name. Oh, I forgot the teacher's name. Thank you, teacher's name, who I forgot, but you changed my life. There was a creative writing course, and it was the first one that they had ever at my high school. It's called Salesian High School. It's in Richmond. And so I just started writing in this class, and from there I actually got accepted into a writing class at UC Berkeley for this, like a high schooler, like a sophomore grade high schooler. I got accepted into this writing class. It's creative writing class, and so we would just creatively write all summer long, and it was so fun and magical and freeing. So I'm going to say it started because of video games and this creative writing course in high school.
Yeah, and when did you find that you were writing stuff and it was being produced and performed? It was like something that you were like actively pursuing.
I think in the past 3 years. So I participate in this thing with Q Youth Foundation called Eastside Queer Stories, which have you heard of it?
Recommend.
Yes.
It's the best.
Yes, it's so fun. It's the best. And so I participated in this, and I wrote this one-act play called Burn Her, and it was about the Salem witch trials and these lesbian witches. And it was a crazy, zany 15-minute comedy. And so that was produced, and I was like, oh, wow, this is so freaking cool. Like, this crazy idea that was in my brain is on stage, and And people came up to me and were like, that was so weird and unique. And I was like, that's how I see the world. So you're saying I can show people how I see the world? This is fucking awesome. And so I will say that Eastside Queer Stories to Q Youth Foundation, they were the reason why I began to push and create my stories to try, the goal is ultimately production, to try to get these things up and going and onto the ground. And from there on, like, I started doing readings at Ensemble Studio Theater. So Burn Her is now becoming a musical. And so I'm writing that every day. Some days I don't, but that's what it is. But I ended up writing another play with my playwrights group called New West Playwrights, and they push me, and in a good way. Like, their criticism is so great. After Eastside Queer Stories, just everything about me was like, I can tell stories, I can write, I can use my weird, crazy, ridiculous brain to show people like how I see things in the world and why I see them. Oh, I'm going to say this. Growing up, I always asked my parents, like, why? Like, why is that a thing? Why is that a thing? And I wouldn't stop after they gave me the answer. I would ask deeper, but why? But why? And my parents were so mad every single time. And even now I still do that. But I think when I was writing Burn Her, I answered my own why. And to me, that felt like a superpower. I was like, oh, this is why, and this makes sense in my brain? Like, maybe this why will make sense for other people. And so that was kind of a full circle moment for me. I was like, oh, you were just a curious kid all your life, and even now I'm a very curious adult.
What themes, like, do you see in your writing? Is there like a through line that you see that comes up a lot for you?
I think the themes in my writing are understanding other groups of people, and I'm going to say that from like both angles and perspectives. By that I mean, like, the people that we perceive as villains, there's a reason why they think the way they do. And yeah, for some people I'm like, there's no saving you. Like, I'm sorry, honey. I'm like, oh no, I can't. That's too crazy for me. That's like, but other people, it's like they genuinely want to, like, they have a reason as to why they think like that, and they're not asshole people. They just, have a reason and a way of thinking. And my thing is, I always want to put those people in the same room and be like, okay, how would these characters react, and why is that happening? And I want the people who are perceived as the villains to understand the people who are like the nice, kind, like, othered people, I definitely write about people who are underdogs, people who are othered, people whose perspective is like not the mainstream, because that was me growing up all my life. And so weird, crazy characters who aren't understood are my bag, and they're usually the protagonists in my show, and they are usually the ones that by society are viewed as like the evil people, or like the people that just seem like, oh, you're too weird for us and too ridiculous. You must be evil, you must be a witch, or you must be like an awful human. But they're not. The people who is the society, they are the people that, like, they probably need to understand empathy and compassion and understanding. And I will say comedy, like, everything that comes out of my brain is comedic. Everything. Like, I like drama, don't get me wrong. I think drama is beautiful, but that's not my voice. My voice is like, imagine if Tina Fey, Lin-Manuel Miranda, and Monty Python had a baby. I think it would be me. Like, Titus Andromedon from Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt is like my favorite freaking character. Like, Pinot Noir is the best song in all of the world, the whole world. And so that's my through line is comedy and like out of the box protagonists who are viewed weirdly.
The sort of how like you got on my radar is I saw that you were part of like Meet Cute LA.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering if you could just like speak to like your experience with them and like everything that you guys are up to.
Yeah, so giant shout out to Meet Cute LA. Hannah and Katie, I love you. They're the founders of Meet Cute, and from its inception, like, Hannah and Katie wanted to create a place for theater artists from all walks of life, all colors, all genders, all people. And I came across Meet Cute about a year and a half ago. I was invited to come see the 10-minute plays, and I loved it. I was like, this is so fun. Then I got asked by someone to act in a show, right? Then I was like, I want to write a show. Let's do this. So I wrote a 10-minute play about the Legend of Zelda, and it had to deal with like video games and domestic violence. Just fun comedic things. I love that. I love that piece. It's great. So then after that, Katie and Hannah invited me to join them as a co-producer and help them curate a Meet Cute event. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, you want me to help y'all curate this Meet Cute event? This is awesome. And so I did that, and then I've been on with them. I'm now officially like a part of their team, and I'm just on with them working and doing stuff. With the pandemic and stuff happening, we can't do 10-minute plays, but we are doing like workshops for people to come learn new skill sets and just connect. And there's something to be said about theater in LA that so many of the big theatrical houses always like buy plays or get plays into their spaces that aren't from LA people. I'm like, we have so many artists here, and I think what Meet Cute is doing is specifically catered to LA audiences and specifically going, we have all these artists here. We want them to meet. We want them to create awesome shows because we deserve a platform. We deserve a place to call home. And if the big theaters aren't giving us that, then we make our own thing.
Yeah, no, and yet I've been really impressed with all like the virtual programming y'all have done. It's definitely like speaks a lot to like a group of people who see some like world pandemic coming, shutting everything down, and then still feels the need to like create during it.
Yeah, we there are a lot of play companies that are doing like readings of plays. I think that's very different. Like doing a reading of a play that wasn't meant for a Zoom, I don't think works. But if you're doing an actual play for Zoom, I think that works. But we were at Meet Cute, we were like, we want to not do that. We want to like focus on connective mediums because Meet Cute was designed to not only to have these really fun and deep and funny shows, but for people to connect in the community and get to know each other. So through these workshops and through these like spaces that we've created on Zoom, new people are meeting each other, and now in a more national scale, like they're like artists in New York who are meeting LA artists, and so people are getting to know the LA theater scene, and there's a lot. We have so much to offer here.
Yeah, and especially in LA, it's like such a thing to like constantly be meeting new people, and the way you do that is at shows, at screenings, at like mixers. Yeah. So like when we physically can't meet in a space, it definitely does stunt the like growth of that, of like getting connected. So I've been very impressed with what y'all are doing.
Thank you.
Very cool.
You have to come to a real Meet Cute when the world is back to normal.
My friend just was one of the plays.
Cesar, right? Better Than Grinder?
Cesar, and then also Jesus, Daniel. Yes. Like, such a fan of both of them. They're such good friends of mine. Was able to make it, so, sorry for that.
Okay. And then the pandemic happened.
Yeah. But no, they definitely amazing work that I see. And I'm always like recommending people to it because it's a great opportunity to like have your work put up.
Yeah, and at Meet Cute, we strive on making sure that, we select very diverse voices. Like, I had a friend that came to the show in December when my play went up, and he was like, oh my God, there's so much melanin and otherness and everything, and this is like the most diverse LA theater scene I've ever seen. And I was like, yeah, it's because that's how they created it, and it's amazing.
Yeah, I did notice, because that's people that get on this podcast are the people that I can't avoid on social media. You are definitely one of those people, and I mean that in a good way. It's like always hustling, always working, always promoting.
That's why I'm bald. It's because I'm so stressful. I'm kidding. That's genetics.
So I did notice that you were part of the like Hollywood Here thing that just happened like out of nowhere just within the last couple of weeks. So I wanted to like, if you could just like talk about what it is and like your experience of it.
So Hollywood Here was started by these really cool two individuals that work in the TV industry. And so everything that's going on with the world is like, it's crazy. But it is a much needed awakening for the entire world, because what is happening now is that whiteness is not the standard. That is what is happening. It's like this idea that we have to own this amount of land, that we have to have this amount of money and like make all this business and money. That is not like that standard, I think, will not exist for my kids when I have children, because that's all being torn apart. So Hollywood here, what this initiative was to raise the melanin percentage in writers' rooms. And I'm not meaning like a specific Latinx show or a specific Black show or an Asian show, that we have these like diverse people, like one or two people for these shows, or multiple of us. I'm talking like any show, whether it's a show like, for example, I love the show Gentified because it stars a Latinx cast. Yes, it is a Latinx show, but it's a show about like romance and drama and changes. So I think what's happening is that shows should, from people's perspective, are just becoming shows. Like white people have just shows. They don't say it's a white show, They say that's a show about betrayal. That's a show about revenge. That's a comedy show about vampires. And so what Hollywood Here Inc. is doing is getting melanated people, into rooms where, like any writer's room, because at the end of the day, we're human and we have a perspective on these stories, regardless of what the story is. Like, as long as I'm interested in the story, I want to be a part of this writer's room. Like The Umbrella Academy is a really great TV show about superhuman individuals with with a dysfunctional family. And I would love to be in that writer's room. Like, please hire me for that show. You don't have to hire me as like, oh, we have a Latinx person, so now they're going to be the perspective on Latinx people for this whole entire show. No, because that puts stress on me. And no, like, I want to write for what feels good in my heart,
Especially in the last week or so with the Hollywood Reporter, very much centering Black voices, and a lot of the stuff that people didn't feel like they could say, they could call out or even call in. I loved what Hollywood Here Inc. was doing with the Razor percentage, because the like initiative that just came out right now, it was like, we're going to connect, Black writers with working writers, because again, this town is who like who knows who gets the job, who can recommend who, and those circles tend to stay very small. There's not like a ton of like initiative to like reach out. So that's what I loved about it, was like, we're going to get all these working writers and we're going to purposely have them reach across virtual lines of people they don't know, for an opportunity to like build a relationship.
It was amazing. I got to meet Elena Peña, the creator of Diary of a Future President, and we had a virtual 40-minute, I'm going to call it a Kiki tea, and it was so fun. It was just a great and wonderful experience, and now she and I are connected and like, talking, and it was great to feel like in an industry, like I was talking with this to a friend, I think a week ago. I feel like right now, back in like the 90s and early 2000s, I think minorities were fighting for scraps at the table. Now we're all like creating our own tables and pushing the other person ahead and going, I don't care, like, if you make it or if I make it, if one of us makes it, we're just bringing everybody in. Like this, like the doors are opening, and that, I think, is a huge cultural shift and difference, because back in like the 80s and 90s, people were trying to assimilate and look like the model minority. Like, I have to be a good Latinx person, a good Black person, a good Asian person, and once I get in, like, I don't need to help anybody else. It's like, no, it's not the case, and I think that's changing. That's why you have all these amazing shows like Vida, Gentified, Latinx representation in What We Do in the Shadows. You have all these people really coming together and pushing everyone. Every single minority is pushing each other to keep going. Like, if Crazy Rich Asians comes out, I'm gonna go see that movie. Black Panther came out, I'm gonna go see that movie. I'm gonna support all of these artists, and I think this together awakening is opening so many more doors for all of us.
Yeah, and I think you're right. People have sort of started to build their own tables, and I think just from what I've seen the last couple of weeks, there's more talk of like for gatekeepers, for corporations, it's like what are the actionable things that you can do? I think we for a long time, and we still do it, is we play up to like how can I fit in with you? How can I adjust myself to be like to make you comfortable? And I think what's happening now is like everyone's like, look at the numbers; these aren't acceptable. What are you going to do about it?
Completely. It's interesting because you get people that are like, oh, you're ethnic, like you're gonna get all the jobs. I'm like, I'm still not going to get all the jobs because of the way that colonialism and the system of the world works, and that's deeply embedded in the U.S. and in many parts of the world, right? And my thing is look, right now, what is happening and going to happen is Black, brown, Asian, indigenous people, anyone that's like not that has not whose voices have not been heard, they're gonna hear us. Like, and yeah, you might not be able to sell your show or do this, but think about like in the amount of cinema that has existed in 100+ years of cinema, that is the same voice we've heard, and we're only about to get like what? Like, I'm gonna say in the past 3 years or so, I felt truly like we're creating these way out of the box stories that aren't stereotyping us, that are like really going, look, like you can create this crazy unique show about, I don't know, video games and sex workers. There we go. Cool. And we're gonna see ourselves as like more than a stereotype. We're gonna see ourselves as like heroes, villains, like I can't explain it. Like there's a difference between like somebody being like a thug in a TV show, right? And being a stereotypical like Latinx thug in a TV show versus them being like a nefarious villain with this like true sense of like, this is what I believe, why we should be doing this. And they're not a villain in the sense of like a stereotype. They're in the villain that their perspective and ideologies, you might even be like, oh my God, I think it kind of side with what they're thinking. And that's what we're talking about, like the 3D depth and creation of characters, and then really like diving into the mind of human beings, because that's what we are. We're human beings with a little more swag and spice to us.
Yeah, and so like let's talk about like the writing you're working on now. Like what's coming up for you that you want to like let people know about?
Yeah, so by the time this podcast comes out, there's this one-act play that I wrote called The Sex Seance, and it's about this lesbian couple who want to have a sexy time Zoom call, but they first have to banish a ghost in one of the girls' apartments. And trust me, go see this little cute, fun, crazy, heartfelt play. That's one of the things that I have worked on, and we'll probably develop that into something. I really like these two characters. And then I'm working on a pilot right now that I've started working on since March when quarantine happened, because the Blacklist teamed up with Nalip, the Untitled LatinX project, and another company to elevate Latinx voices in TV. So are you ready for this? So I was like, oh, I knew about this, right, for like months. And in typical, like, procrastination writer fashion, I was like, I'm going to write this in a day and a half. And I did. And I submitted it. And it wasn't, like, the perfect pilot, right? I was like, I just need to do this. But the idea came to me from the ancestors. I really want to talk about it. I just can't right now. Fully because of, like, things that I had to sign, and other people had to sign as well. It's the most exciting project that I've ever worked on. So much so that after I submitted it and whatnot, I've just been writing every single day. Every single day. And I have a 5-season plotted out arc for this show. All I can say is that it takes place in ancient Central America with a mockumentary crew. And that I think will let you know what the show is, without fully saying what the show is. And it's been one of like the most, and I'm learning so much about that time period. It's the most freeing and most fun I've ever had writing.
And I'm always curious for like writers, who are the people that you admire? So the way I sort of frame this is like, who are your writing heroes? Who are some of your peers that you want to shout out? Who are like people that you don't know but you're stalking on Instagram and you're just creatively
well, I can't tell you who I'm stalking on Instagram on a podcast, because then that would be, they would know that I'm stalking them. So,
but then they know you're a fan. They know you love their work. But yeah, who are some of those people for you?
I'm gonna say my number one is Lin-Manuel Miranda. His work, specifically Hamilton, has helped my brain and the brains of so many people flesh out like beyond the scope of what storytelling is and what a story can be. And he's like, he takes these huge grand stakes and makes them so interpersonal and connected. And that's something that inspires me to no end, and that's what I want to infuse my characters with, is the sense of like grandeur with interwoven and deep things that he deals with. Dealing with loss, dealing with power structure, dealing with political gain or lack thereof. So he's like my biggest and hugest inspiration in that realm. Now, for the realm of comedy, my biggest inspiration, I'm going to have to say it's Tina Fey. I love her. I love Tina Fey. 30 Rock is so freaking funny. Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt is hilarious. Mean Girls is a masterpiece. Her comedy is so zany and off the wall. It's exactly what I love to write. Like, episodes of Kimmy Schmidt are ridiculous. They're ridiculous. Like that one line where Titus is like, "Back up MTV's Daria." I was like, yes! Bless this line. Bless this reading of this line. It's just so freaking funny. And I also enjoy, like, through comedy, is I get inspired by actors and, like, creatives who take my script and riff on it and, like, add something else that I was like, oh my god, like, that's a great character choice and a line for that character. And it makes me excited to go like, oh, well, I never thought about that. That's a new perspective to, like, add into this episode or into this, like, play. And it just makes it more exciting. Like, I get inspired by working with other creatives who are just as excited about the material we're all working on. Because I think as a writer, personally, this is my personal thing, I think that if you're so attached to the words, it doesn't let, like, the humanity of the individual taking your words fully exist in, like, a fully realized thing. So, like actors, for me, like, should never be scared to mess up my words, because you're not messing up my words. You're saying them how you feel like would come out come out of this character, And to me, that's beautiful and so inspiring, because you see the character in new lights, and that gets me excited. So, like, for example, my play Burn Her has been performed with 4 different casts, and each cast has just taken each character in such a unique and different way, but it still rings true to that character. But what I really see is that it rings true for that actor, and that to me is so cool, because the same words that were on this page have incited and inspired other people to take a hold of it as they would like to and express that as they would like to. And to me, that's exciting, without losing the journey of the story.
Yeah, no, that's like the magic of, like, theater.
Oh my
God, it's like organic.
It's so magical. It's so magical. I can only work with rooms with people who want to collaborate. And I will say this: that was maybe like when I was 19 or 20. I don't think that was the kind of person I was. And I think it took growing up to being like, oh, like, art is so much more beautiful and nourishing when we're all in it together, when we're all, like, having fun, and when we're all learning from each other's perspectives. And it's great. I think it wasn't until like 3 years ago or 4 years ago that now became my new MO, is to just exist in the sense of, like, comfort and freedom, that you're not ever going to mess up. You're just exploring. And I think exploration leads to new avenues and new spaces.
If you could just shout out your social media where people can find you.
So you can find me on all handles at Henry Alex Kelly. Kelly spelled Kelly. Oh, it's the most Irish name for an Afro-Latino, you know. So I'm on all social media handles as Henry Alex Kelly. And my website is www.henryalexanderkelly.com.
And, now that you've sort of mentioned it, I've sort of started asking this to people, especially when they're not based in like the three sort of Latinx representation that we know. Like, what are people's like reactions? Like, because it's like when you're being cast, when you're writing, when they say your name, like what are expectations you've seen? What are the things that...
Yeah, so my name, Henry Alexander Kelly, is the most Irish, white marker name ever, right? And this is due to the fact that my great-great-grandfather was an Irish immigrant. You ready for the story? He was an Irish immigrant that came to New York first, which is why I think I love New York so much. Then, after New York, he was supposed to go to Puerto Rico, got sick, right? They kicked him off the boat into Nicaragua. He's out in the jungles, roaming around. He's like, oh my gosh, like, what am I doing here? Gets picked up by a militia of people, right, who were from Europe, out here in Central America, right in the jungles. They lined up my grandfather with other people. They were shooting these people down, and two people before they shot my grandfather down goes, hey, somebody out that wasn't in the line of fire goes, I know that man, that's Henry Kelly, he served in a war in Ireland, don't kill this man. They pull him out, and then my grandfather meets this beautiful black goddess out in Nicaragua, and they have babies, and then they have my great-grandfather or my grandfather, and then they have my grandfather or my dad at that point. I don't know, there's too many generations behind. And then my dad was born, and then I was born. And so the Kelly comes from the Irish side of my dad's great-great-grandfather or great-grandfather. It's
That's insane.
It's insane. But here's the most insane and craziest part. So if you look at me, right, I'm like a dark brown Latinx man, Afro Latinx man, but you're like, oh, he could be Samoan. Maybe he's Filipino. Maybe he's something else. If you look at like my cousins on like my dad's side, they have like my brother, like very curly, kinky hair. I like got a mixture of like my dad's kinky, curly hair, and like my mom's my mom's more like Latinx, indigenous, mixed with like a lot of European features. Looking at my cousins, right, and my dad, you're like, oh no, we're definitely black, like light-skinned black people, but we're definitely black. Also, to reconfirm that is 45% of me is from West Africa. After I did what's it called, the DNA test, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this makes absolute sense. But what's weird is that Latinx people, right, who let's say were born with other Latinx people in their city, are clearly black or light-skinned black Latinx people, don't think they're black. Because they think that being black is being to equivalent of like, you have to be either A, really dark-skinned, or B, be American, like a black American person with certain customs and cultures. But no, Dad, we're definitely Afro-Latinx people. Like, would you like a photo of yourself with your curly as fuck hair? Your nickname is El Negro. No, we're not just Latinx people. And finding, like, my dad, I don't know, my dad is finally realizing all this, which is crazy for me to think that, like, all his life. And so it's a journey. It's definitely been a journey, because even my Dominican friends whose parents clearly look black are like, oh, we're not black, we're Dominican. It's like, no, you like, trust me, you're definitely a black person. It's been interesting to discover. I'm not gonna say discover it for myself, because I knew in like middle school or high school, and even my brother was like, you're black, right? I was like, no, I'm not black, I'm Latino, Luis, what are you talking about? And I was like, oh, no, we definitely are. But for my dad to like, on all his life to like now slowly realize that is very crazy, and in a good way. It's like, oh, my dad's accepting of a piece of him that like has been a part of him all his life. and it's just weird, and it's something that I'm navigating right now with my family, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement. It's like, yeah, Latinx people are discriminated against, but there's a difference in like this perception of, like, even in our own countries, darker skinned people, indigenous people who are darker skinned get treated a certain way. Like, there are these sayings that I freaking hate that they say in Nicaragua. Oh, I say, anda, that person's cheap, anda como un indio, like he's really cheap, like anda, and I'm like, that's not an okay saying to say at all. So it's unlearning all these things and really taking out like colonialism and this like deep rooted like idea that, oh, I'm not one of those people. I'm my own person of my own country. It's like, no, you're still part of that group of people, whether you like it or not, which I hope you do like it, because I mean, this is magical. I don't like get sunburnt. I have really delicious tasting food. I feel drums and the rhythm of, like, that's also from my indigenous roots too. It's like both those things. I cannot deny those things, I mean, you go to somewhere like Peru, right? There's a lot of Asian people they're Latinos, they're Latinx, they're Asian Latinx people, because Latinx is a culture. It is what we are as a society in those locations. But I mean, ultimately there's only one human race, right? One race, the human race. But we have different colors and textures and different body shapes, but it doesn't mean I'm more or less of the other thing. I'm equally both things. One is a cultural and ethnicity, and the other one is your physical being.
This sort of like leads me to like my last question. I like the guests to help title the episode. The prompt is a blank Latinx writer. So in that blank, you can put more than one word. You can mix them all around. Just whatever feels true to like how you identify, yourself as a writer, the conversation, just whatever feels true to you.
A zany Nicaraguan feeling the beat writer.
Perfect. Love it.
Yes.
So with that, I want to thank you so much for being on the pod. This was such a fun conversation.
It was so fun. You're magical. You're so great. You have this like very relaxing, I'm like, oh yes, please talk to me more, Ruben, por